I don't know how many of you have managed to see a 2 or 3-year-old child use a computer mouse for the first time. They don't get that a horizontal movement of the mouse corresponds to a vertical movement of the cursor up the screen. So they try and pick the mouse up to move the cursor up the screen because the translation between the interface and the screen is just lost on them. Sometimes I don't think we understand that there's a lot of pre-literate behaviors and gestures involved with things like books, for example. So I've got a 1-year-old daughter, and sometimes she picks up books upside down, and she was still, a few months ago, trying to open books from the spine end. So I think we need to understand that there's pre-literate behaviors and gestures involved with almost everything we do, like using a traditional computer or trying to open a book. And I think the same is true of things like musical instruments as well. With a musical instrument, it takes a long time for your gestures to get ingrained. I'm learning to play the guitar at the moment, and it does take a lot of practice for your fingers to start doing what your brain wants them to do. So this raises an interesting question for me. What does it mean to be able to play the guitar? And what does it mean to be literate? Being able to play the notes in kind of a plodding way is at the opposite end of the spectrum, isn't it? To people who are just awesome, like Rodrigo and Gabriella. There's a real spectrum involved there. So I think there's a context. The difference between the two is the fact that it takes a lot of definition to decide what it is that counts as things like being able to play the guitar or digital literacies. So this is taken from UNESCO in the 1950s, and they talk about how it's really not possible to speak of illiterate and literate people as two different categories. It all depends upon context. So when you're playing the guitar, there's formal situations and there's informal situations. And there's lots of different contexts within which you can be literate as well. So bearing all that in mind, today I want to talk to you about my grandma, bless her. First of all, before I tell you a story about my grandma, notice that iPad in the background. We're going to come back to that later. So my grandma, she loves football. She always has done, and now that she's 88, she's got a lot of chance to watch as many football matches as she wants. So my dad recently arranged for her to get Sky Sports installed. And there's a problem. You can't just get Sky Sports, you have to get all those other hundreds of channels as well. So whereas previously she would have pressed channel up or channel down to go to the right channel, now she has to deal with a menu system. I long ago realized I wasn't the best type of person for technical support, so I've kind of outsourced that to my dad. And he has to try and show her how to navigate to the right channel, and this has taken weeks. Why is that? And why a generation ago was it me who had to program the VCR? Well, I think it's partly because menu systems rely on branching logic. You choose one option and then you get some kind of sub-options as a result of that. And if you don't want any of those options, you have to back up. Well, where does that exist in nature? It seems to be a peculiarly digital kind of thing. It's the same kind of thing you get when you try and phone big companies and they try and route your call through to the right department. They give you some choices of menus and sub-menus that you navigate using a numeric keypad, and then they put you on hold for 15 minutes, you get through to somebody, and then you have to be transferred anyway. Actually, not all companies do this. I had to return something to Apple recently, and they don't do this. They put you through to some kind of disembodied voice that recognizes your voice and your request, and then it puts you straight through to the right department. I think that Apple understand that there's kind of a barrier to getting started in the digital world that they try to lower somehow. So I said I'd come back to the iPad. Why is it so easy to use? Well, I think partly it's because it's got a really simple menu system. Everything that you want to do is represented by some kind of icon. So you want to check your email, you click on the email app icon. You want to get out of that app, you press the only physical button on there. You want to buy a new app, you go to the App Store. It's really simple. But if we're talking about literacy as being reading and writing, then we're missing half the story here, aren't we? It's what Mitchell Baker, who's chairperson of Mozilla, calls elegant consumption. And I think we need to move beyond elegant consumption, because we're better than that. So really all that was just a prelude to what I really want to talk about today, which is the work I've been doing for the last 6 years on my doctoral thesis. But I wanted to mention all that kind of procedural and behavioral stuff because what I'm going to talk about from here depends upon all of that. So I want to talk about Success Kid, LOLcats, and Casual Pepper Spray Cop today. They're all examples of memes. And if you haven't seen a meme before, it's an idea, behavior, or style that spreads from person to person within a culture. So let me tell you the story of a meme. On the 26th of August 2007, Flickr user Lenny G took this photo of her son Sammy on the beach. She made it public and put it on a photo stream, and it soon was being emailed and added to social networks. That expression's fantastic, isn't it? So fairly soon it was being remixed by people. People are adding text and images into this, and it became known as Success Kid. And there was a whole Russian news group dedicated to just remixing this image one after another after another. Then somebody took that image and cut it out and started putting in other images, but the meme really took off when it started going on meme generator sites like QuickMeme. On these sites, the barrier to getting started is significantly lowered because all you have to do is add some text and it does the rest for you. So you get some wonderful examples like this. But my favorite, because I've got a 5-year-old son, my favorite one is this one. But that's not the end of the story. So Virgin Media picked up on the success of this meme. They took Sammy, they changed his name to Tim, they flipped him around, changed the colour of his shirt, and put him on a billboard, which inevitably led to somebody doing this. In the end, though, everything was okay. Lenny G cleared everything up. She said that Virgin Media did pay for the use of the photo, so everything's okay. Never in a million years could she have imagined all this would happen that day at the beach when she took that photo. I'm sort of in shock that it's gone from Flickr to meme to Virgin Media billboards in London. And in fact, it will also soon appear in vitamin water commercials in the US. So a really long story of a meme there. So memes are like genes. They kind of go viral. And this is not only possible today, but it's getting easier. Usually when people talk about memes, they often cite things like LOLcats. Now LOLcats is just literally a picture of a cat with some text or a caption next to it. And these are all over the internet. Basically, there's more cats than people on the internet, I'm sure. But this isn't a new idea, putting a picture of a cat with some text next to it. These have been going around for years. This is a LOLcat from 1905. It's a cat in a dress in a chair with a caption, "What's delaying my dinner?" Well, that was obviously hilarious 100 years ago. So this isn't new. We have an idea, we use a tool to realize our idea, then we communicate in some way. It's just that communicating stuff is a lot easier than it used to be. So if you imagine in 1905 how hard it was to create a LOLcat, you'd have to physically take the picture and develop it. You'd have to add the caption, and then you'd have to send it to somebody else through the post. Now, unless you were some kind of newspaper editor, the number of people you could impact was going to be quite small. If you contrast that with QuickMeme, then a few clicks of the button and you can remix this stuff and send it to loads of people, thousands of people, almost instantaneously. So that word I just mentioned there, remix, I think that's really important. In fact, I think it's so important, I think it's right at the heart of digital literacies. It's kind of at the other end of the spectrum to that elegant consumption I was talking about earlier. I mentioned Mozilla just back there. Mozilla are the people behind Firefox. You might recognize that logo. They're doing some fantastic work at the moment around learning. And they talk about creating a generation of web makers. They've got this tool called Hackasaurus. And it has these X-ray goggles. And what you do is you can see behind the web, and you can see how you can remix it using HTML. I think Mozilla understand that digital literacy is a condition. It's not a threshold. It affects your identity. Because every time you're given a new tool, it gives you a different way of impacting upon the world. The medium is always going to be at least part of the message. The trouble is that people who come up with digital literacy frameworks make things a little bit too simplistic. They insist on this kind of linear ordering of skills, as if life was that simple. And people love talking about like one definition of digital literacy, when really what we need to be talking about are digital literacies, because they're plural, they're context dependent, and they need to be socially negotiated. I'm going to say that again because it's really important. So it's digital literacies, they're plural. They need to be socially negotiated, and they depend heavily upon context. If you believe in one digital literacy to rule them all, then you're kind of having this fallacy around sequential ordering. Let me just explain that. Now, some of you might not have been alive in the 1990s, so you might not remember the bad old days of dial-up modems. For those of you who have never experienced the slowness of a dial-up modem, just try going on a UK train on their Wi-Fi. It's pretty much the same. So back in 1996, I went on the internet for the first time when I was 15. My physics teacher loved ukiyo-e, which are pictures of the floating world by Japanese artists like Hokusai and Hiroshige. And I love these as well. I've got them all around my house. So these take a long time to download if you're on a slow connection. And there's two ways in which you can encode images for the web. The first way is sequentially. Now, if you encode an image sequentially, what happens is it loads it line by line from the top. So if you're on a really slow connection, you get like sky, 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 sky. Oh, what's that? Sky, sky, sky. And so on. It's really, really frustrating. So the way that I used to prefer, and still prefer, is when you encode things progressively. And what that means is you start off with a blurry image, and it gets progressively richer in detail as it downloads the information. So what I want to argue is the way that we should develop digital literacies is more progressive than sequential. We need to say that we develop digital literacies in a kind of linear sequential order, I think, is really disingenuous because it presupposes some kind of procedure that we as educators or adults or students or people who are training people, we didn't go through ourselves. That's not the way that we necessarily develop digital literacies. I think the way to develop digital literacies is to focus on people's interests and to try and get them to get this intrinsic motivation to want to develop those digital skills for themselves. So if there's a radius of individual interest, and if there's a kind of a circle of important issues, then the place to develop these digital literacies is at the overlap of those two circles. Now, does that mean there's kind of a free-for-all? Does that mean that anything goes? Does that mean we should just chuck people in at the deep end and tell them to get on with it? Well, no, we do need some kind of structure, some type of framework to hang our ideas on. We need some kind of guiding principles, some essential elements of digital literacies, if you will. Thankfully, I think I can help with that. So, I've been researching digital literacies for quite a few years now, and I've compared it with my experience as a teacher in the classroom. And at the moment, these are what I believe to be the 8 essential elements of digital literacies: the cognitive, the constructive, the communicative, the civic, the critical, the creative, the confident, and the cultural. And right at the heart of all of that, I believe, is the remix. So let's go back to Sammy, or Success Kid from earlier. Those people who were remixing those images, I think that they should demonstrate some of these elements of digital literacies, at least the cultural, the communicative, and the creative. And even Virgin Media demonstrated the civic element of digital literacies by licensing that image to put on their billboards. Digital literacy practices do change over time. For some of you, you will not understand what this is. It's a 5¼ floppy disk, and you'll not understand why you'd want to use one of those or the cultural practices around it. And I'm fairly sure that some people will not understand why anyone would want to do this. It looks like she's just pulled him out of the ocean and has given him the kiss of life, doesn't it? So digital literacy practices do change over time, and the examples that I've given you so far have been quite frivolous. I've given you examples of LOLcats and self-photographing French couples. But these things can be used seriously and for real social good. The easiest example here would be if I showed you examples of how technology was used during the so-called Arab Spring of early 2011. But I like memes, so I'm going to stick with them. So in November 2011, there were some students occupying the University of California, Davis, as part of the worldwide Occupy movement. And they refused to move. So Lieutenant John Pike came along and decided to casually pepper spray them from point-blank range. Lots of people took pictures of this, and guess what? The images got remixed. So we get Lieutenant John Pike inserted in iconic images from history. So there he is, pepper spraying soldiers, putting up the US flag on Iwo Jima during World War II. There he is, casually pepper spraying liberty leading the revolution. And there he is in Willard's Spirit of 76. The thing is that this is quite, important stuff, because memes amplify ideas. They make them stick in your imagination. They can be used as propaganda by both sides of an argument, and kind of grappling with these important issues in playful ways can lead to serious consequences. Lieutenant Pike was actually soon suspended pending an investigation. So I think that when we're dealing with these memes, these LOLcats, these casual pepper-spraying cops, we're actually speaking a slightly different language. We're immersing ourselves in a different culture. Somebody who's influenced my thinking a lot is Stephen Downes, and he talks of literally speaking in LOLcats because they've got their own vocabulary, it's got its own syntax, and it's got its own grammar as well. So this is the world in which we live. This is the world where ideas spread very quickly and can be remixed. It's a world where the knowledge, skills, and ideas that we've got can't be learned once for all time, because digital literacy practices are constantly in flux. It's a lifelong project that all of us need to be involved in. So, in conclusion, I think we need to move beyond mere elegant consumption. We need to try and encourage people to remix stuff, especially young people, because digital literacy practices change over time. Let's focus on people's interests to develop their own intrinsic motivation. And let's start with some kind of progressive framework, something like the 8 essential elements of digital literacies. Thank you for listening, and do feel free to remix this presentation.